heard of good girls?
Good night, Charlie.
Ready for some real excitement?
Go bowling.
Bowling?
Today, we're continuing our journey with vampire hunters Charlie Brewster and Peter Vincent in a little-known sequel, Fright Night 2. This is an interesting one. It's a follow-up to a successful, highly regarded cult hit. So how is it that Fright Night 2 fell into obscurity? You may think it happened because it was just flat-out bad. Nope, that's not the case at all. The real reason this movie remains relatively unknown, outside of the horror community, is actually pretty interesting and shockingly disturbing. We'll get to that story soon enough. First, let's discuss the movie itself. As always, spoilers are ahead. Fright Night 2 was directed and written by Tommy Lee Wallace, who did a really solid job stepping into the shoes of Tom Holland, who didn't return for the sequel. Wallace is probably best known for directing Halloween 3 Season of the Witch and the 1990 miniseries It, two horror favorites. He does really well here overall, the acting and performances are on point, the story expands on the original yet remains faithful to the vibe of the first movie. There are some great visuals and memorable cinematography. In an interview with Icons of Fright, Wallace noted that he went to see Tom Holland and wanted his blessing. The only advice Holland actually gave him was, don't get too serious about it and make sure it's fun. It's gotta be scary, but it's gotta be fun. And I think Wallace pulled it off. To me, the best thing about Fright Night 2 is William Ragsdale and of course the legendary Roddy McDowall. It's very obvious they had a blast here. And face it, without these guys, you don't have a movie. Seeing Charlie and Peter back, saving the world from more bloodsuckers was worth the price of admission. Their oddball relationship is just fun to watch, and once again, you can't help but root for them. I'd even go as far as to say their dynamic is somewhat similar to Marty and Doc Brown.
Charlie! Oh, I'm so glad I found you both. I've been looking for you all over. Marty! You've got to come back with me!
Fright Night 2 picks up 3 years after the first movie. We begin with Charlie in an unusual place as he's now been convinced by his therapist that his entire conflict with Jerry Dandridge and his battle royale with vampires was a delusion. So, our dynamic is switched up. Charlie no longer believes in vampires, but of course, Peter Vincent believes in them fully. After all, he fought them in a previous movie and steered clear of this guy's brainwashing. Also, Charlie's no longer a hornball teenager. Now he's a hornball college student.
Come here.
Charlie.
Charlie's new girlfriend, Alex, as played by Tracy Lynn, does a great job. Initially, she's set up to be a love interest / victim, who I figured might be picked off pretty easily. But to my surprise, she ended up playing a larger role in the events. She's also a bit of a joker.
Don't do that.
I'm sorry.
Mark me down as scared and horny.
While visiting Peter's apartment, Charlie's old school window peeping skills kick back in. He spots some large crates being loaded from a truck, and eventually, he sees a suspicious group of people walk past him. Most notably our new villain, Regine, as played by Julie Carmen. She catches Charlie's eye pretty early on.
Looking for someone incredibly seductive.
Do you know how to use your lips, Charlie?
A lot of Fright Night 2 seems familiar, and that's because we do get more of the same, but it's changed up enough to remain engaging. We get more of Peter Vincent hamming it up on TV. We get more of Charlie stalking vampires. That's a must. But we also get a new spin on the hypnotic power of vampires. In a previous movie, it was Charlie's girlfriend Amy, who we saw seduced by Jerry Dandridge. Here it's Charlie who's seduced by Regine. Beyond just being seduced, he's even bitten by her. That leads us to one of the more interesting aspects, Charlie's slow transformation into one of the undead. This is toyed with throughout the movie, and we get some mileage out of it. But it's mostly a plot point that plays out heavily in the conclusion. And then, there's Regine's group of bloodthirsty misfits. They're all standouts.
You could say that again, partner.
In Regine's group, we get a tough-as-nails, bug-eating dude named Bosworth, as played by Brian Thompson. Thompson, of course, should be very familiar. He's been in everything from the original Terminator to Cobra, X-Files, and Mortal Kombat. There's also Belle, a mute roller skating vampire, the first transgender vampire in movie history, as played by Russell Clark, who was the renowned choreographer for Michael Jackson and many other stars. And then we get one of my favorites, John Grease as Louis, who's the werewolf of the group, but also serves as the comic relief. We've seen him before as a werewolf in another 80s movie, Monster Squad, but he's also famous for roles in Napoleon Dynamite and most recently White Lotus. And then there's Julie Carmen. She had a real uphill battle here. Chris Sarandon was impossible to top as the lead villain in the original movie. But Julie Carmen did carve out a unique performance here. She does an excellent job as a seductive, mysterious, and intimidating new adversary. When she makes her grand entrance, things get interesting. Composer Brad Fiedel returned with his distinct sound, and that helped connect the movie right back to the famous synthesized score of the original. In this scene, Charlie is thoroughly seduced, and he even buys Regina's cover story that she's merely a performance artist who's in town for some shows. After Charlie leaves, Peter sticks around and we get a nice callback to his mirror scene from the original movie. Here he notes that Regina and Belle, who are on the dance floor, don't cast reflections. Soon after, we get the big reveal. Regina admits she is a vampire, but more to the point, she's the sister of Jerry Dandridge. She's in town to take revenge on Peter, and especially Charlie. Now, I really do like this direction of the story. It bridges the gap between the two movies and ties things together nicely. It also helps explain how Charlie and Peter could end up battling vampires twice. The second time isn't just something that happens by chance. Instead, it's a tale of revenge. My only issue is the reveal could have come a bit sooner. Regina's Jerry's sister, but that's never really taken advantage of as much as it could have been. I do like that it further establishes and expands on the lore of the movies. We get some more hints of the Dandridge family history, which was only hinted at in the previous movie. I'd also say the third act was entertaining enough, but definitely not as good as the closing battle in the original.
Welcome to Fright Night.
Now you guys know I'm a fan of practical effects. Fright Night 2 does feature some nice creature effects, especially when it comes to the werewolf. I think I mostly enjoyed the scene where Regina appears in Charlie's room as he sleeps. She enters from a window in the form of mist and then materializes. It's pretty impressive, and it even allows us to see exactly how these vampires get around in this universe. There's some interesting trivia when it comes to Fright Night 2. Apparently in the original script, Evil Ed was set to come back. We did see Evil Ed somehow survived at the end of the original movie.
Oh, you're so cool, Brewster.
The script was eventually rewritten after Stephen Jeffries moved on to star in Robert Englund's 976 Evil. When the script was revised, the Evil Ed character evolved into Louie, and that's how we ended up with the new character, a Wolfman, as played by John Grease. Amanda Bierce was supposedly set to return too, but by this time she'd moved on to play Marcy in Married with Children. If you follow the Fright Night comics from now, way back in the day, basically everyone from the original movie made a comeback, even Jerry Dandridge. Those old Now comics were really out there. They also featured Charlie and Peter battling a Spider Boy, a Squid Man, a Minotaur, aliens. That's a whole other story. On that note, director Tom Holland also wants to put his stamp on the universe again, with his own take on Fright Night via a novel and comic series. I mentioned earlier that the story behind how Fright Night 2 fell into obscurity is interesting and disturbing. In truth, Fright Night 2 was mostly a victim of circumstance. Initially, it was scrapped by Columbia Pictures after a change in management, and ended up at the company New Century Vista where the budget was slashed. Under the distribution head Jose Menendez, the movie got a limited release and was only shown on 148 screens. Obviously, this meant doomsday for the box office. Roddy McDowall, who loved the part, was hit very hard by the failure of the movie. He convinced the original creator, Tom Holland, to come up with a pitch for Fright Night 3. Holland was up for it and even agreed to a meeting with Menendez, who McDowall described as, quote, the worst human being he'd ever met. So clearly he wasn't a fan of Menendez. Although that meeting never came to pass, Tommy Lee Wallace and Roddy McDowall did meet with the chairman, Jose Menendez, for lunch to discuss the state of the movies. Rightfully so, both McDowall and Wallace kicked up dust about how crappy Fright Night 2 had been handled. Menendez apparently wasn't very sympathetic, the meeting was said to be pretty negative, but supposedly Menendez was at least open to the possibility of a Fright Night 3. However, that very night, Menendez and his wife were brutally murdered by their two sons, Lyle and Eric, the Menendez brothers. This was a tragic, widely publicized story, and it was huge at the time. When the news first broke and the headlines were plastered across every newspaper the next morning, nobody knew the Menendez brothers were behind the murders. Apparently, Roddy McDowall called Wallace and said, well, I didn't do it. Did you? With that, the rights to Fright Night were left up in the air, and there was chaos. The movie did make it to VHS and eventually popped into video stores, surprising the hell out of me as a kid because it was a movie I didn't even know existed. Eventually it made it to DVD, which went out of print, and finally there was a Blu-ray, but you really have to hunt around for that one. So would I recommend Fright Night 2? Hell yeah, very much so. It's great to see Charlie and Peter back in action, and a new villain and a group of freaks were a lot of fun to watch. I'd mostly recommend it to anyone who is a true fan of the original, as opposed to casual fans. If you love the original, but just never got around to seeing this one, which is possible considering how obscure it became, then it's a must-see. So I rate this one 3 out of 5 shark-faced vampires. That's it for me, guys. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, remember, hit like and sub. It helps the channel, and I greatly appreciate it. Be well, stay safe, later.
Don't do it.